channel to speak about the conditions in the prisons of Bahrain. The Gulf Institute for Democracy and Human Rights organized this conference alongside the World Day for supporting the victims of torture to speak about those heroes who are spending their valuable days of their lives in the behind the bars in the Gulf states. And tonight we're speaking about Bahrain. I'm just gonna repeat uh, this part in Arabic, and then the rest of the speeches will be in English tonight. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نشكر جميع المشاركين في هذا المؤتمر، وخصوصا في جلسة الليلة التي ستتناول الحديث عن الأوضاع في سجون البحرين. كما نشكر جميع المتابعين الذين سيتابعون المؤتمر عبر اليوتيوب أو عبر القنوات الفضائية التي تنقل المؤتمر. هذا المؤتمر يكون بالتزامن مع اليوم العالمي لدعم ضحايا أو لمساندة ضحايا التعذيب. سيكون تحية لهؤلاء الأبطال المدافعين عن حقوق الإنسان الذين يمضون أياما وسنية حياتهم خلف القضبان بسبب نشاطهم. My speech tonight will be about the non-custodial sentences that was implemented lately in Bahrain, which the Bahraini authorities are trying to take advantage of this step. The idea of non-custodial sentences or alternative punishments was discussed for the first time during the United Nations Sixth Conference of Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice in 1980. They aimed to reintegrate those convicted criminals, especially the beginners or those who are not dangerous or who are not considered dangerous to society, and to prevent them from interacting with the professional criminals or being influenced by the professional criminals inside the prisons. Bahrain's authorities declared having endeavors to implement the idea of non-custodial sentences since 2015. On the 19th of July 2017, Bahrain's government approved Law Number 18 of 2017 on penalties and alternative measures, which was implemented for the first time in October 2017 against a Bahraini man who was convicted of committing a crime which was theft. On the 20th of May 2018, the public prosecutor declared to begin implementing the law officially. And in the 18th of June 2020, Maria Khouri, the head of Bahrain's Bahrain's National Institute for Human Rights, said that until that day, 2,700 inmates in correction and rehabilitation centers got benefited from the alternative punishments, implying that such large number help in decreasing the overcrowding in Bahrain's prison. On the other hand, following the spread of COVID-19 pandemic across the world, many calls had arisen to clear prisons, especially from the prisoners of conscience, as described by the UN's High Commissioner for Human Rights. And we in the Gulf Institute for Democracy and Human Rights, alongside other human rights organizations, issued many calls as well to call on the government of Bahrain to release the prisoners of conscience. One of these calls was a statement that was signed by 70 other Arab human rights organizations, including 18 Tunisian organizations, calling on Bahrain's authorities to respond to High Commissioner demands regarding the prisoners of conscience to release them immediately and take serious and urgent measures to clear to similar to what was implemented to what is implemented in other countries in such a humanitarian context, and to include releasing the prisoners in the government's plan to face the coronavirus pandemic. As it has been proven that the prisons are breeding a ground for the infectious diseases, and the infections there spread quickly across the inmates. In addition, the conditions inside the Bahraini prisons do not allow, especially inside the Bahraini prisons, do not allow for social distancing to be implemented, and it is impossible to implement the recommendations of the World Health Organization and other health institutions to face this pandemic in overcrowded prisons. Moreover, according to official reports, Bahrain's prisons are overcrowded, and the long record of the security authorities in Bahrain documents that deprivation of medical treatment is one of the kinds of torture used against the prisoners of conscience, what resulted in declining of the healthcare levels inside the prisons and reaching those levels at the moment are had reached their lowest, and what threatens of a real disaster about to happen if COVID-19 reached them. What are our comments regarding the usage of the non-custodial sentences or alternative punishments? Number one, non-custodial sentences are used against or are handed to prisoners who are convicted criminals or who committed crimes in their society, uh, but are not dangerous. So it's like it's okay to release them, but hand them a kind of punishment to correct their behaviors. Bahrain's uh, Bahrain's prisoners of conscience didn't commit any crime. They are not criminals. They didn't commit any fault, and they had should not be imprisoned in the first place. Using using the non-custodial sentences against the prisoners who are convicted criminals, uh, one of its aims was to prevent these people from transferring into real criminals in society and thus like causing harm to them and to the society altogether. Number two, the arrest of the prisoners of conscience is a crime committed by the Bahraini authorities against those prisoners and against their families because, as mentioned before, they are not criminals, they didn't commit any fault, and they should not been released in the first place, and the immediate unconditional release is their right. And this release, which like we and other human rights organizations have been lobbying for years alongside the UN bodies, and it is their ultimate right. In addition, they have the right to compensation for all the violations, torture, and harm that they faced inside the Bahraini prisons. So, applying alternative punishments or non-custodial sentences on the prisoners of conscience is doubling the injustice against them, and it is a huge breach for human rights. Number three, Bahrain's authorities should not be given the chance to receive the praise they are willing to by applying such a law against the prisoners of conscience. However, Bahrain should be reminded that this step is incomplete and it breaches rights and lacks respect for human rights, and they should have dropped all the unjust, harsh sentences against the prisoners of conscience and the political prisoners, because these sentences were handed to them over charges related to freedom of expression or peaceful assembly. Release them immediately without conditions and start extended investigations to hold all the people who are involved in torturing them and violating their rights accountable, and hand them the punishment they deserve before compensating the political detainees and the prisoners of conscience. Number four, if we took a more deeper look on the implementation of the non-custodial sentences, we'll find that most of the prisoners who were released under such a law were convicted criminals. But the Bahraini government is trying to play on numbers, so they are combining the numbers of the prisoners of conscience and the political prisoners who are released under this law with the prisoners who are convicted criminals. So, like they are saying that we are releasing a huge number of prisoners, while the percentage of the prisoners of conscience is so small. In addition, only a smaller percentage again of the prisoners of conscience who were released under two royal pardons were prisoners of conscience. The majority were prisoners who were convicted criminals. The authorities are threatening some of the prisoners of conscience who are being released under this law of doubling their sentences in case of their participation in any peaceful gatherings, rituals, or religious activities. Some of them are also threatened not to contact other people. Bahrain authorities are urging the prisoners who are released to promote this law, to praise the government's practices, and enhance their reputation in front of the local and international public opinions. Uh, o- Moreover, the authorities in Bahrain are confiscating the right of opinion and the right of expression of the prisoners of conscience who are released under the non-custodial sentences law. These prisoners who are being released under this law are living with their community, are hearing and looking and knowing all the suffering of the people who are living with them, but they cannot speak freely as they used to do before their arrest because they are restricted by the provisions of the alternative punishment law or the non-custodial sentences. Thus, the Bahraini authorities is getting rid of one of the most important and annoying sources who used to speak and highlight the violations that are committed behind the walls and behind the bars of Bahrain. One more valid point is that the Bahraini authorities are intentionally ignoring the special cases among the prisoners of conscience and the political prisoners, even among those who fulfill the conditions of the non-custodial sentences. There are several cases of chronic and serious diseases among the prisoners of conscience who need treatment and whom the prison environment does not or do not suit. In addition to elderly prisoners, children, and those with the special needs. All of these are being ignored. The Bahrain government is trying to choose who of the prisoners of conscience will be released under such a law and who will continue their prison sentence. Moreover, Bahrain is trying to evade the compensating the prisoners of conscience and political detainees by releasing them in such a way. Some of those who received alternative non-custodial sentences are deprived from working. They have to pay a very expensive or very huge fine, but they have to volunteer and work in social services without having any other source of income. So, like, how are they going to fulfill or to meet their needs, their family's needs, and to pay such a huge fine without being allowed to work or and receive income? They are not allowed to renew their passports or their IDs without having the permission of the authority that follows up their sentence. And some of the prisoners were not allowed to continue their university or their college studies despite being released. Number five, which the point that we have been speaking about for years, that conditions inside the prisons of Bahrain are miserable and they contravene with the UN standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisons or Nelson Mandela rules and lack the minimally humane treatment. Bahrain Forum for Human Rights monitored 352 violations of depriving prisoners of conscience of their right to medical treatment during 2019 only. And not to mention that the overcrowding in Bahraini prisons in that way exceeds their capacities, make it impossible to implement the social distancing measures as a precautions to face the novel coronavirus pandemic. So Bahrain is trying again to make use and to have advantage of an incomplete and unjust step, and they are just trying to promote themselves as abiding by the human rights international standards, why in reality they are not. Thank you for listening, and now I give the mic to Brian.
Okay, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yep.
Yes,
okay.
can.
Thank you. Let me apologize in advance. The internet is really pretty crappy today. There's no Wi-Fi, and I may just freeze or drop off at any second, and I apologize in advance if that happens. Thanks very much for inviting me to talk today. I think things are a little bit different now. I mean, you've alluded to the conditional release and what's happened, and of course, COVID has changed the picture in all sorts of ways. I've been on panels, online and offline, talking about prisoners in Bahrain for very nearly 10 years now in, I don't know, a dozen or more countries. And looking back over that decade, I guess, we've been partially successful in raising the issue of why prisoners of conscience ought to be released. I think we've been very successful in telling the world about what's happened. I don't claim any of this credit for myself. I mean that there have been these issues raised in Geneva and Brussels and London and across the major capitals of the world. In terms of actually getting people out of prison, there has been very limited success, let's be honest. In the early years, as in 8 or 9 years ago, there was some improvement. There's music that I can hear talking over me. I don't know if you can hear me or not, really. Shall I keep talking? There's no point. I can't even hear myself. If you hear that music too, then I'll stop talking.
Okay, we should be good now.
Okay, are you back? All right. Not to worry. So I was saying that over the years of talking about these sorts of issues in various places, we've had frankly pretty limited success in terms of getting people out of prison who shouldn't be there in the first place. There was 2011, 2012 some success about getting reduction in sentences, even some acquittals for a small number of people around those medic trials. But really, more people have been put in prison since then. And while we are right to continue to make this case legally, and we are morally right to keep raising this case, in terms of getting people out of prison, hasn't been a stunning success, right? And I think some of the reasons for that is that those major forces which really could make those things happen haven't really been on our side, whether it's the UK government or the US government or the Saudi government or the regime in Bahrain. Is those forces which are in play now were really more or less the same. In fact, in some cases, even worse than they were 9 or 10 years ago. So what can change the big picture? I mean, I would love to think that us raising these cases, month after month, year after year, is suddenly going to have a difference, and someone in the Bahrain regime is going to say, yes, you've been right all along, and we've been wrong, and we're going to let these guys out. We have to keep raising the cases this way. I just don't think that that's what's going to happen. We can keep this ping pong of us proving that we are legally right, that we are morally right, and the government in Bahrain saying we don't care. So while I'm not suggesting we don't keep doing this, because we have to and we should, something big also needs to change. And if that's not going to be one of the big international players putting pressure on the Bahrain government, maybe it's COVID. I mean, it changes the conversation a bit. it certainly hasn't meant the release of human rights defenders and others prisoners of conscience in Bahrain. But I think it gives us a new line of argument rather than the lines of argument around us being morally and legally right. This is now, a health question apart from anything else. This now affects prison staff and threatens them as well as prisoners. So I think that, rather than I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over every year. And if you want me to keep saying the same thing over and over every year, I'm quite happy to and continue to travel in the world and say it where you want me to say it. But if there is something new, something that's going to make a difference, then we should be pushing that too. I think that there is a real risk, given the terrible prison conditions in Bahrain, that there will be a major outbreak of COVID there. We don't know exactly what the situation is inside the prison buildings. We know that some staff have been tested. We hear stories about the terrible overcrowding, about the lack of medical care. And so that's a big risk for the government. I mean, if they're weighing up what to do, that's really a huge risk for them. If there is an outbreak within the prisons, and supposing some of these people who have been made internationally famous, I mean, big names who are known around the world. The prisoners of conscience in Bahrain are the most famous Bahrainis. They're more famous than any of Bahrain's athletes or any of Bahrain's ruling families. If they were to contract the virus and God forbid die, that's a massive problem for the Bahraini authorities, and I hope that they are addressing that. On the non-custodial sentences, I don't agree, Fatima, with everything you said there. I think for some prisoners of conscience, if they want to take the decision that they will opt for this, then I'm not going to criticize them for doing that. I think that it's not a substitute for them being released unconditionally, immediately, without any strings attached. Of course, that's what should happen, and that's what we've been calling for and will continue to call for. But in my mind, it's a little bit like saying, if there are improvements in conditions, like, if prisoners are allowed books or if they're allowed access to a dentist, I think that's a good thing, and we should say so. But that doesn't mean we're going to stop saying, but they should just be immediately and unconditionally released too. So if there are prisoners of conscience who think that the option of a non-custodial sentence is better for them, it's safer for them, it gets them out of the prison for whatever reason, then I'm not going to say they shouldn't take it. Nor am I going to say to any other prisoner of conscience, it's certainly not my place, if they are reticent about that they ought to take it. That's really not a decision for the likes of me or people working in other NGOs to take. So I wouldn't condemn anyone for taking it. Nor would I urge anybody else to take it. I am going to stop there. I'm really going to hope that my internet hangs out and keeps up for any questions that people have. But I'll hand it back over to you now, Fatima. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Just to clarify one thing, I wasn't condemning any prisoner of conscience who decide to take or to opt for the non-custodial sentences. I was criticizing the government of Bahrain of not applying such a law fairly or justly. Of course, it's the decision of each of these prisoners. It's their own decision that they take, that they think it's better for them and for their families. It's not my place to ask them to do or to leave such a chance. But I was just clarifying some points because the government of Bahrain is trying to promote itself as the hero who is doing the right thing. And thank you for your speech.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, and it's not okay. I mean, just to clarify, I'm not saying these alternative sentences are now okay as alternatives to what is real justice. Absolutely, they're not. But if some prisoners think it's better for them to take that step now, I'm not going to criticize them for that either. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you, Brian. So now we'll hear Aya from Human Rights Watch.
Thank you, Fatima. So today I'm going to be talking about the imposition of the death penalty in Bahrain, particularly in unfair trials. So Human Rights Watch has for years been documenting the imposition of the death penalty against detainees despite serious allegations of torture and due process violations. Now, I'll start off by saying that we oppose the death penalty in all circumstances because of its inherent cruelty. But the miscarriage of justice is even greater amid evidence that detainees were tortured and denied fair trials. There are currently 10 detainees in Bahrain who are at imminent risk of execution, having exhausted all of their legal remedies. Just a few days ago, on June 15th, the Court of Cassation, which is Bahrain's court of last resort, upheld the death penalty against two men, Zuhair Abdullah and Hussein Rashid. We're currently conducting an investigation into their cases, but our preliminary findings indicate that first, Zuhair Abdullah and his family alleged that Zuhair was held incommunicado for 55 days after his arrest. He was interrogated without the presence of a lawyer at Bahrain's Criminal Investigations Directorate and the Royal Academy of Policing. Zuhair told HRW and the Bahrain Institute for Rights and Democracy that he was subjected to a range of very horrific abuses, including beatings, electric shocks, and sexual assault. His family and wife were also threatened with abuse. Zuhair said that he was then tortured into confessing that he carried out a terrorist attack, despite his lawyer maintaining that there was no physical evidence tying him to this crime. We're now still investigating Hussein Rashid's case, but the one thing that I'll highlight about his case that I found quite alarming was that he was initially sentenced to death in absentia, so he wasn't present to be able to mount a defense. Now, unfortunately, the cases of Zuhair and Hussein are not unique. We recently documented two other cases, the case of Hussein Ali Musa and Muhammad Ramadan, two men who were also sentenced to death following unfair trials and allegations of torture. The High Criminal Court of Appeal upheld both of their death sentences on January 8 of this year, and they're now waiting for a final verdict from the Court of Cassation. What's interesting about Hussein and Muhammad's cases is that this is the second time that the Court of Cassation will examine their cases. A criminal court first sentenced them to death on December 29 in 2014 for killing a policeman despite their torture allegations. The Court of Cassation then confirmed their death sentences in 2015, but overturned them in 2018 after a previously undisclosed medical report appeared to corroborate Hussein Musa's torture allegations. However, despite this new evidence, the High Criminal Court of Appeal reinstated the convictions and the death sentences. Here, I'll discuss in a bit more detail both of these cases because I think they both are show very clearly some of the horrific torture that prisoners are subjected to in order to extract their confessions, but it also shows the ineffective role of the investigations and oversight bodies that Bahrain has created. So both men allege that officers at the Central Investigations Directorate, the CID, tortured and sexually assaulted them. Ramadan refused to sign a confession, but Musa said that he was tortured into confessing to the charges against him and incriminating Ramadan. So Musa described the torture that he endured. He says, "They were kicking me on my reproductive organs and would hit me repeatedly in the same place until I couldn't speak from the pain. Someone at the torture site was telling me, 'We already have the judgment written. Just say that Muhammad Ramadan is the one who gave you the bomb and will commute your verdict to a life sentence.' I decided to tell them what they wanted." Ramadan also described the beatings and sexual abuse that he endured at the CID. He said, "During my interrogation, the torture, beating, insults wouldn't stop, even as I was answering their questions. And when I told them about my back pain, they lay me down on my stomach and hit me on the back. They would pull my pants down to show my private parts. I would remain in such a shameful condition throughout the interrogation." However, despite torture complaints from Ramadan's wife and from ADHRB, an NGO based in the United States, the Interior Ministry's ombudsman did not investigate the allegations for 2 years. But in April 2016, in response to a question from the UK Foreign Office, the Ombudsman and the Bahraini Embassy in London falsely said that the authorities hadn't received any allegations of mistreatment or torture regarding Ramadan's case. Now, fortunately, ADHRB was able to produce a receipt of the original complaint. So the Bahraini authorities were backed into a corner, and they then had to announce that they would conduct a full investigation into the treatment of Muhammad Ramadan and Hussein Musa. So the Special Investigations Unit, the SIU, and the Public Prosecutor's Office, which investigates and prosecutes criminal allegations against security officials for torture and mistreatment, started an investigation. And in their report that they launched on March 18, 2018, the SIU said that it recommended the courts reconsider the verdicts against Musa and Ramadan in light of a newly uncovered medical report by an Interior Ministry doctor that had not been available during the initial trial. This medical report detailed injuries on Musa's wrists that, according to the SIU report, raises the suspicion that he was subjected to assault and mistreatment that coincide with the procedures of his arrest, detention, and questioning. The SIU then concluded that there is a suspicion of the crime of torture, which was carried out with the intent of forcing them to confess to committing the crime they were charged with. So this is, a huge admission by an investigative body, from the Bahraini government. This isn't international NGOs, this isn't civil society, this is a government investigation unit concluding that there is a suspicion of the crime of torture. However, unfortunately, the Bahraini court still upheld the death sentence against these two men despite this new evidence. Now, under Bahraini law, after the Court of Cassation, the court of last resort, confirms a death sentence, the decision is then sent to the king, who has the power to ratify the sentence, commute it, or grant a pardon. Unfortunately, the Bahraini king has not been using his power to correct these grave injustices. On July 27 of last year, Bahrain executed 3 men, including Ali al-Arab and Ahmad al-Malali, both convicted of terrorism offenses after the king ratified their death sentences. Again, Human Rights Watch here documented their allegations of torture and very serious due process concerns in their trials. So our main call to Bahrain is to join the many countries already committed to the UN General Assembly's resolution calling for a moratorium on executions, a move by UN member countries towards completely abolishing the death penalty. And we call on King Hamad to exercise his authority in these cases to halt executions and then also move to abolish capital punishment outright. Thank you.
Thank you, Aya. And now we're going to hear Jawad Fairouz, the chairman of Salam for Democracy and Human Rights.
Thank you, and I'm pleased to be with you and with your distinguished guest. In my comments, I will concentrate on prisoner of conscience as a general and what is implemented in Bahrain, issue of the systematic torture, because tomorrow, as everyone knows, we are with the International Day of Supporting Victims of Torture, 26th of June, and then the need of transitional justice. Recently, we used to hear a lot that Bahraini government tried to promote themselves to saying that Bahrain is a democratic country. There are so many elections going on, municipal elections and parliamentary elections and so on. But definitely, we all believe that the people's sovereignty will be exercised only if they have full right of freedom of opinion and expressions. And it is so clear and it's been documented. And we hear with so many international human rights bodies, and part of it even allies of Bahrain, United Kingdom, United States, they admit that the freedom of expression and opinion is diminished in Bahrain and confiscated. So definitely that claim is not, we cannot believe it, that Bahrain is a democratic country and the basic for it, that's all, at least the basic freedom of rights has been abolished. Then, yes, when you come to the constitution of Bahrain, yeah, we can see a lot of beautiful words and articles that indicating of the human rights issue, freedom of expression, and so on, but it's not being implemented nor being considered, neither in the rest of the legislations. I can say that protecting society from terrorist act, the nationality law, or even a penal code, and the rest of the things. We can see many legislation which been passed recently. It is totally away from these basic rights, and part of it banning any type of the demonstration in the capital, or trying to dissolve political parties, or a total political isolation, which happened with many political parties or opposition political parties, and even they've been banned from candidating themselves to any elections or even voting. Many of these political parties members are banned from even voting in any elections. So totally what we can see, the practical action by the government, by the authority, either by passing this anti-democratic or anti-human rights law, or by their actions, is totally contradicting with this meaning. Prisoner of conscience are definitely, we want to give it a clear definitions. All those who are fighting for rights, public freedom, and social justice. Definitely, for our understanding, prisoner of conscience is not just human defenders, they are part of it, but any individuals, any people, any citizen fighting for the freedoms and social justice, and fighting for the rights, any type of the rights, social rights, political rights, economical rights, any rights related to the human beings. I think they consider to be prisoner of conscience. Yes, those who are commit a crime, we can deviate them from the prisoner of conscience. Other than that, all those who are fighting for this, definitely they are a prisoner of conscience. And our records indicates that, our documentation indicates that the most majority of the prisoners in Bahrain are prisoner of conscience. But unfortunately, as Fatma indicated in her beginning talk, unfortunately, when it comes to the pardon and releasing the prisoners, we can see the minority are prisoner of conscience, either even when they apply the non-custodial sentences, they consider that one. So the majority, once again, I want to emphasize on that, the majority of the prisoners, mass majority of the prisoners in Bahrain are prisoner of conscience. Bahraini authorities restricting freedom of opinion, as I mentioned, expressing to the extent of all the type of the detention, or the type of total brutal acts against majority of those who are being detained in different ways. And we can see that and realize and document it. And me being a victim of torture, I already witnessed that one. And until today, we are receiving so many claims by all these people, either during the detention or under the custody when they are, or even after they've been sentenced in the jail. So all the process, the day they get in confrontation with the police security, they start to be under torture even after the trial. As all of us know, usually the prisoners, when they've been tried and been sentenced and they kept in the jail, they feel a little bit relaxed. They will not be tortured. But unfortunately, till today, we can see that, and we can hear and a lot. We have, and we made a lot of documentation of many prisoners up to date. Still, they've been tortured. There is a claim by Bahraini government to so many international human rights bodies that they stopped torture since July 2017, since when the National Security Authorities office or building or center in Maharag area, they stopped detaining human rights defenders and so on. But it is totally not true. I can mention here, for example, just a month back, two brothers of Fakhawi, Ali and Muhammad Fakhrawi, they've been beaten badly and they've been kept in the isolated cell, although they've been sentenced to life and they are in jail prison. So systematic torture still we think that Bahrain is applying. It is not an individual act. So in this regard, the torture issue for us, it is very alarming. And Bahrain joined the Convention Against Torture in 1998, but not yet joined the optional protocol that been entered in force by 2006. And unfortunately, as everyone knows, up to date, since 2006, Bahrain didn't allow a single special reporter to enter the country and carry on the investigation. So here is our claim. If the government saying that everything is transparent, they are protecting or try to be more human rights in their acts, and there is certain regulation within the police regulations, and there are so many independent, quote-unquote, human rights bodies that are acting inside the country. The question is why they don't allow special reporters to come in Bahrain and try to carry on their duties. And they know that they have got so much complaints, but so many victims been looked at. So in this regard, I can mention on the issues of the torture. And as I said, once again, because I was witnessing it, I'm not just saying that we heard it. I was part of it, and I know all these types. So I can list it as following: the type of the torture in Bahrain, rape and sexual harassment. I think most of us they saw the documentary by BBC channel, what they published about two victims of sexual harassment and raped by Ibtisam Assayagh and Najah Youssef. All the details, they mentioned that one. And it was recent. It was not just during the uprising in 2011. It happens on 2017 and later on that one. Electric shocks, beating, pornographic in eye and hands to extend periods of time, sleep deprivation and use of toilet, psychological torture, humiliating and degrading practice such as forcing victims to spit in the face of other victims. This is exactly what I witnessed while I was in custody during that time. The attack of wild dogs on victims, this is exactly happened to me. Cursing and using absence words against victims, and so many others. So unfortunately, this type of the systematic torture, and with this type, so horrific type of the torture is still going on. And now the question is, do they act such bad and horrific acts just on the integration rooms? Unfortunately not. And I witnessed that one. Such acts, including integration rooms of Ministry of Interior and National Security authorities, it's been acted in prisons, even in public prosecutor buildings. They do such tortures, even in so many public premises, and I can name it during that time. I hope now it's not continuing. Even in some health centers and health clinics, the prisoners has been, or detainees has been tortured. And myself, I've been tortured in one of the health clinics during that time. I think the most problem that Bahrain is facing toward that, why they are not positively acting, because there is impunity for perpetrator of torture, and still it is continuing. Imagine such horrific acts is being made, killing, torture, and so on, and yet a single torturer or perpetrator is not being charged yet. Yes, we've seen that they've been taken court, maybe some minimal court verdicts has been made against few of them, but yet we cannot see. Although when we say it is a systematic torture, that means an order is being given by high officers. Even a minister is not being changed. Even an undersecretary is not being changed, or maybe it could be a victim. Let us say, all that is not happening. And when we refer to the Committee Against Torture's report, the Committee Against Torture, they, as you know, regularly each 4 years, they jointly they hear to the Bahrainis authorities claim about what they recorded, and sometimes even they bring victims, or even they listen to the reports issued by the NGO. So in their reports in July 2017 clearly indicated that unfortunately the torture in Bahrain is systematic, and they clearly indicated that so much actions to be changed by Bahraini authorities. But Still, I don't think so. That's going to be taken seriously. At the end, just to indicate it for transitional justice, yes, whatever is being chosen by the prisoners or their family to have a little bit further changes in their environment, this is the right. But definitely, won't be a definite solution. The definite solution going to be Bahrain should adopt transitional justice. And that transitional Bahrain should implement traditional justice to ensure that serious human rights violations do not occur. Injustice dealt with, all the victims should be revised, and there should be fact-finding investigation committees, and then definitely they should be compensated. At the same time, all those who've been charged should be tried. Impunity hold those responsible for human rights violation. They require the establishment of an institution subject to accountability, the reform of judicial and non-judicial authorities that had a hand in they had in charge with all this stuff of the human rights violation. The traditional justice program must be subject to the office of the High Commissioner. Unfortunately, still there is no clear cooperation with the OHCHR's office, and we hope that such cooperation will lead more power toward that OHCHR that can implement their vision toward the transitional justice, and they can and be in Bahrain and allowed to be in Bahrain without failure conditions, and then they can establish their capability building and other programs. So my last one going to be on the recommendation. We urge government of Bahrain to adhere to the international law and work to harmonize its legislations with and take as a reference that can be used to protect the right of expression of freedom, and to release all political prisoners, mainly political prisoners. And part of it here, we should mention the name of Abdul Hadi Khwaja, who has been sentenced to death. Abdul Jalil Sankiz, he is, as you know, he is in special need, and he should be released. And the rest of 13 political leaders of oppositions, Sheikh Ali Salman, Abdul Wahab Hussein, Hassan Mishame, and the rest. And all this being documented, and they are prisoners of conscience. They didn't commit any crime, they just expressed their view. And establishing measures to eliminate impunity, and initializing procedure to hold those responsible for torture responsible, and establishing mechanism for compensation and redress of the victims. I think without that clear package and adaptation of the serious human rights reforms, which are going to lead maybe for the further dialogue with the opposition to have the political reform, only that way we can guarantee and be sure that the Bahrain is going to be in the right direction and more secure and stable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jawad. We should now hear Rina. I'm not sure if Rina is still with us. I believe we lost Rina, unfortunately. I'm happy to hear if you have any more comments. Otherwise, we're gonna just end our panel tonight. Okay. So thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you.
For your participation tonight. Just to emphasize on one thing, this conference is shedding the light on the situation on Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, while we'll have other conferences and other events that will take a deeper look into other Gulf states, into the human rights violations committed in other Gulf states. Thank you very much, Jawad, Brian, and Aya. It was a pleasure hearing you and having you on our panel tonight. And tune in tonight for another panel on United Arab Emirates with another brilliant panelist. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.